Explain like I'm 5. Why do hypodermic needle ends not fill with a tube of skin like pushing a straw through cheese does? It's more like pushing a straw into a juice box. The pointy end of the straw punctures the opening, and the film is pushed out of the way. Skin isn't like cheese. Skin is very flexible. The point of the needle creates an opening. The arc of the needle widens the flesh opening. Think about when you use a boba straw. Similar shape to the needle and follows the same concept on the plastic lid. A hypodermic. Hypo equals beneath. Dermis equals skin. Needle is a thin, hollow tube with a sharp tip at an angle, a bit like an arrowhead. So the point pierces the skin and downward pressure expands the incision and allows the needle to pass through the layers of skin. Skin is elastic and flexible, unlike cheese. The big ones, which I doubt they'd ever use on a living patient, used to find little skin and fat plugs in cadaveric blood samples all the time. Already a ton of explanations about how it doesn't happen, but many are missing the fact that skin plugs do happen occasionally. About 1 in 150 blood donations ends up with a skin plug. If you put your finger in the other end of the straw before you push into cheese, it will not fill up with cheese. The air will keep the cheese out. Same concept with the needle. It already has a finger on the other end of the straw. It does, it's just not noticeable. We take biopsies of things like thyroid nodules in the same manner. Use a bigger needle and depress it into the lesion, while the syringe is under negative relative pressure. The material ends up in the syringe and is transferred to a slide for review. So you're actually right. It works more like a Capri Sun, except with less tries, and you typically don't accidentally push the needle out the other side of the body. Cheese is mushy. Skin isn't. Skin also has some tension, which means as it tears it pulls itself out of the way. It'd be more like pushing a straw through plastic wrap or a t-shirt than cheese. Deleted. The hole is on the side, not the tip. The tip pushes the skin out of the way for the rest of the needle. Also, skin is a bit elastic, so it wants to pull away from the needle ever so slightly, preventing any flesh from jamming up into the side opening. Because skin separates due to tension, tarring cheese is a consistency and breaks apart more easily. Although there is a beveled tip designed so that doesn't happen, a simple explanation would be that we administer fluids through them that infiltrate the tissue. We don't just stick them into tissue for fun, LMAO. The amount of cheese in our skin is insignificant enough to where you don't have to worry about that. As has been said, the angle of the opening and the elasticity of the skin should prevent this from happening. When on occasion a hypodermic needle needs to pass through a thicker tissue, such as the chest wall, needle thoracocentesis, or the throat, needle cricothyroidotomy, there is a theoretical risk of this happening. In these instances, it is best practice to aspirate, draw back on the syringe to remove a possible skin plug. A hypodermic needle does not punch, but rather it cuts the skin. If you look closely, the tip is V-shaped, with two sharp blades. These make cuts into the skin, and the rest of the needle slides in. Sometimes they do. I was giving blood once and it was flowing much more slowly than usual. The nurses tried resetting the needle in the vein several times. Ouch. But it never improved. So with only half a bag full, they gave up and pulled it out. Then they said some tissue had clogged the needle. The next day, the entire inside of my arm was bruised. Good times. The same reason you don't get plastic when you stick a boba straw through the plastic top of the cup. The angle of the needle makes sure that one side goes in first, and the solid side of the needle widens the hole without cutting the plug. Because straw doesn't have sideways cut on it. This way, needle makes little point hole on a skin and then widens it. Whereas straw just cuts a large hole on whatever you try to puncture, even if you did it on a skin. Maybe because it's only pointy, and not sharp around the edges, which negates the coring effect. And 3 slant afford the penetration. The point of the needle is slanted. The leading edge creates a straight cut, pushes itself inside, then the slope guides the rest of it into the straight cut rather than cutting further. The angle of the needle and the way skin is constructed. Also, skin is naturally oiled, payable, and not as dense as cheese. Put your thumb over the other end of the straw before you push it into the cheese. It will take more energy, but it will not be backfilled because the air will block the tube. The end of a hypodermic needle is not only sharp, but is angled into a point to puncture and cut through the skin. Skin is made of multiple layers with many components, making it more resilient, complex than cheese. This video shows what's happening. https www.youtube.com/watch v=zzthw25niri and ab_channel = David Fuchs. https www.youtube.com/watch v=zzthw25niri and ab_channel = David Fuchs. You can see a combination of the skin being very elastic and the shape of the needle means that this doesn't happen. Even though the needle is designed to minimize this, it does happen a tiny bit and then the cells get injected. This can be bad when it causes a cancer biopsy to metastasize. What you are talking about is coring. Hypodermic needles aren't just beveled at an angle. There is a slight curve at the angle from the tip. This designed to prevent a core of skin from being cut away. If it does happen, whatever fluid or drug in the skin will just be pushed out into the tissue. Straws aren't pointed on one side, they cut equally as they enter. Needles pierce on one side. Because the tip of the needle is at a 45-degree angle, therefore instead of going into the skin, it separates it. The tip of the needle is angled and only the leading edge is sharp. Once it makes an incision big enough for the needle, the rest simply stretches it open since skin is elastic. Have you ever had a Capri Sun? Notice how the straw doesn't fill up with plastic when you have it into the pouch. Kinda like that. Angled end. The tip being slanted helps. But also your skin cells and the skin that lines your vein is glued together much tighter than cheese. Interestingly, if you look at ELI5 blood smears, you will sometimes come across a clump of these tissue cells, usually from the vein wall on a bad, difficult draw. They are artifact and an experienced tech knows to ignore them. But they can confuse newbies as they look a little bit like abnormal lymphocytes. When taking a biopsy of skin, this is actually a requirement. The tools look like this. https://images.app vu.gl/ISARX9XZTWK8M7. You can see that the tip is flat and therefore does not puncture the skin first like needles do. To answer your unasked question, larger needles have a pointed insert to prevent this from happening, which is removed after puncturing. https://wp.rcemlearning.co.uk/wp-content/uploads/image008-1.jpg. Dilator goes into introducing needle. Then push dilator and needle in between ribs. Remove dilator. Needle keeps the hole open. Put whatever you want in. Take whatever you want out. Person's lungs through needle. But sometimes they do. This happened to me when getting an MRI with contrast. She was apologizing to me and I didn't understand what was going on until she tried a new needle and stuck me a fourth time when she told me the other needle had closed somehow. The skin has a granularity that cheese does not. The fact that the skin is made of discrete cells connected one to another makes it more likely that the needle will gain entrance by pulling the cells apart and sliding between them. The granularity of cheese is on a much smaller scale and a tube can't slip between the grains. Cheese is a solid, dense, low motility material and your skin is elastic, highly flexible and mostly water. It squishes and tears. It does a little. The angle of the needle separates the skin so it's minimized. In arthroscopic joint scope surgeries they use hypodermic needles to puncture into the joint to guide where they'll put ports. Those needles have an insert in the middle, a trocar, that prevents the skin from getting in the hole and prevents that skin from getting in the joint. I think this is a little less ELI5, but others did that already, so I thought this was interesting. Our skin and stuff beneath are built to stretch and to stick together. So even if we were jammed with a perfect cylinder at the end of the needle, the weakest point of the skin would separate and then everything would keep stretching around that. The only time we'd really see a tube, Play-Doh style, is if the item that pierced the skin was far too big to even call a straw and had an edge to it that could cut. FYI, the bevel tip on a syringe needle can get stuck with material. Those of us who use syringes for gas handling, sampling deal with this all the time. It's called coring. Luckily skin doesn't do this much, but septum material can get cored quite easily, which is why we sometimes use side port needles to get through septa. Tip is conical, but bluntish. Gas is pushed through a small opening on the side so that coring doesn't stop at the needle. Additional information: the tip is sharpened with different angles. The edges of these facets are extremely sharp, but not the point where the tube starts. where the tip edges meet, so to say. This way the skin is not cut at this position, but will be pushed away, making the tunnel the others are talking about. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe for more content.